A little girl saved 4 wolf cubs. Years later, they returned the favor in an unbelievable way. The screams shattered the stillness of the night, sharp and piercing, as if the air itself had cracked open. Inside the tiny cabin, perched on the edge of Hollow Ridge, 5-year-old Lily Carter's voice rang out, a desperate cry echoing off the wooden walls. 3 shadowed figures loomed over her, masked men, their eyes glinting with malice in the flickering glow of a broken lantern. Lily pressed herself against the rough-hewn wall, her small hands trembling as she stared at the lifeless form of her grandmother sprawled across the floor. A thin trickle of blood ran from Grandma Ellen's temple, pooling on the warped planks beneath her head. The tallest of the intruders stepped forward, his gloved hand reaching for Lily. "No one's coming for you, kid," he sneered, his voice as cold and biting as the wind whistling through the shattered window behind him. "No one even knows you're here." His words hung heavy in the air, a cruel promise of isolation and doom. But he was wrong. From the shadows at the far end of the cabin, a low rumbling growl emerged, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The men froze, their confidence faltering as 4 massive shapes materialized from the darkness. Eyes like molten amber burned in the dimness, fixed on the intruders with unyielding intensity. The leader turned, his breath catching as he faced 4 full-grown, gray wolves, their hackles raised, teeth bared in snarling fury. Before he could lift his weapon, the largest wolf, a grizzled male with a silver-streaked coat and a jagged scar across his muzzle, launched forward with explosive force. Chaos erupted, the cabin filled with the sounds of snapping jaws, tearing fabric, and the terrified screams of men who had never imagined they'd become prey. Blood splattered across the floorboards, mixing with the dust and debris of the broken night. When the violence finally subsided, Lily stood untouched, her small hand buried in the thick silver fur of her protector. The wolves surrounded her, their heaving breaths forming clouds in the frigid air, their amber gazes locked on the crumpled forms of the intruders. No one in Hollow Ridge would have believed that wolves could save a human child. But then again, no one knew the secret that had begun 5 years earlier. A decision made by a tiny orphan girl that would ripple through time, altering countless lives in ways no one could have foreseen. Hollow Ridge wasn't just another sleepy dot on the map of rural America. Tucked between the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies and a sprawling wilderness of pine and spruce, the village had forged its identity from the rugged land it claimed. For over a century, its people had prided themselves on taming the untamed, particularly the wolves that roamed the surrounding forests. In the town square stood a weathered bronze statue of Elias Carter, the settlement's founder, rifle in hand, one boot planted triumphantly on the carcass of a wolf he'd slain in 1892. Each fall, the community gathered for the harvest hunt, a tradition where old-timers swapped tales of wolf packs menacing livestock, and young men sharpened their blades for the annual call. Wolves weren't just animals here. They were legends, woven into the fabric of Hollow Ridge as symbols of the wildness its settlers had fought to conquer. Children grew up on stories of cunning predators, snatching lambs from pastures, or stalking too close to cabin doors. The local hardware store displayed a row of wolf pelts, their glass eyes staring blankly from the walls, a testament to the town's dominion over the forest. Lily Carter had always been an outsider in this tight-knit world. Orphaned at 3 when her parents' truck skidded off a snow-slick mountain pass, she'd been raised by her grandmother, Ellen, a wiry woman with calloused hands and a quiet strength. Ellen's apple cider was the talk of the county fair, but her granddaughter was a different story. Lily rarely spoke above a whisper, preferring the solitude of the forest's edge to the chatter of other children. Townsfolk whispered that she'd been touched by the crash that took her parents, her pale green eyes often fixed on the trees as if she could hear something no one else could. Ellen defended her fiercely, but in private, she worried about Lily's place in a town that prized conformity over curiosity. Their little cabin sat at the edge of Hollow Ridge, a world apart from the bustling center of town. 3 figures loomed large in the village's social tapestry. Clara Evans, the school teacher who'd arrived from Denver a decade ago and saw a quiet brilliance in Lily. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a grizzled man who kept the peace with a stern gaze and few words, and Jacob Holt, a third-generation hunter whose father had died in a wolf attack 20 years prior. Jacob's hatred for the animals ran deep, his influence ensuring that any talk of wolf conservation was met with scorn. The day that changed everything began like any other spring morning. Lily slipped out of the cabin at dawn, a peanut butter sandwich tucked in her coat pocket. At 6 years old, she moved through the forest's edge with a confidence that belied her age, her small boots barely leaving a mark on the damp earth. She had a secret spot, a fallen pine that spanned a narrow creek, where she'd sit for hours watching deer sip from the water or squirrels dart through the underbrush. Most kids her age stayed in fenced yards, but Lily thrived in the wild spaces. That morning, though, the forest felt different. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that prickled the back of her neck. Then she heard it, a sharp crack splitting the silence, followed by two more in quick succession. Gunshots. Hunting season was months away, but Lily knew some men in Hollow Ridge didn't care about rules when it came to wolves. Drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, she ventured deeper into the woods than she ever had before, the mist curling around her small frame as she followed a faint game trail up a rocky ridge. The shots had stopped, but now she caught the sound of voices, low and rough, punctuated by laughter. Lily crouched behind a thick spruce, peering into a clearing 50 yards ahead. 3 hunters stood there, their rifles slung over their shoulders. She recognized Jacob Holt by his broad shoulders and the slight limp in his left leg. He knelt beside a large gray shape on the ground, nudging it with his boot. "Got the mother," Jacob said, his voice carrying a grim satisfaction. "Biggest female I've seen around here." "Any pups nearby?" another hunter asked, scanning the trees. "If there are, they won't last long without her," Jacob replied, standing and brushing dirt from his hands. "Nature'll sort it out. Let's head back before Bradley starts sniffing around." Lily held her breath until the men disappeared into the forest, their voices fading into the rustle of leaves. Only then did she creep forward, her heart hammering in her chest. The she-wolf lay motionless, her silver-gray fur matted with blood where bullets had torn through her side. Her amber eyes stared blankly at the sky, unseeing. Lily had never seen a wolf up close, only the stuffed heads in town. Despite everything she'd been taught, she didn't feel fear. Instead, a heavy sadness settled in her chest, mingling with a spark of anger at the senseless loss. A faint whimper broke her trance. She turned toward a rocky outcrop nearby, where a hollow gaped beneath a stone. Moving cautiously, Lily knelt and peered into the shadows. 4 tiny forms huddled together. Wolf pups, their eyes barely open, their bodies shivering with cold and hunger. Without their mother, they'd die within days, maybe hours. The villagers would call it a blessing. One less pack to threaten their way of life. Ellen had drilled into her the mantra of Hollow Ridge. The only good wolf is a dead wolf. But as Lily looked at the helpless cubs, something fierce and protective stirred within her. They weren't monsters. They were orphans, just like her. Before doubt could stop her, Lily shrugged off her jacket and spread it on the ground. One by one, she lifted the pups, their warm, soft bodies heavier than she'd expected. She placed them on the fabric, tying the sleeves into a makeshift sling. "It's okay," she whispered to the squirming bundle. "I lost my mom and dad, too. I won't let you die." The trek home was slow, the weight of the pups pulling at her small shoulders. Twice she ducked behind trees as villagers passed nearby, their voices drifting through the woods. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun was climbing higher, and she knew Ellen would be frantic. But bringing the pups inside wasn't an option. Her grandmother would call Sheriff Bradley, and the cubs would be gone in an instant. Instead, Lily slipped around to the root cellar, a damp, half-forgotten space built into the hillside. Ellen rarely ventured there, her knees too stiff to manage the steep steps. Inside, Lily cleared a corner behind jars of pickled beets and apple preserves, piling old blankets into a nest. She set the pups down, their whimpers softening as they nestled into the warmth. Her mind raced. Milk, food, secrecy. How could she keep them alive without anyone noticing? For now, she focused on the immediate. She darted back to the cabin, sneaking a bottle of milk and a piece of raw chicken from the fridge. Mashing the meat into tiny bits and warming the milk, she returned to the cellar. The pups resisted at first, but hunger won out. Lily watched wide-eyed as they lapped milk from her fingers and nibbled the meat from her palm. "I'll call you Ash," she whispered to the largest, a dark gray male with a bold stare. "And you're Ember," she said to the female, with a reddish tint to her fur. "You're Flint," she decided for the gray male who squirmed the most. "And you," she told the smallest, a runt with bright, curious eyes. "You're Spark." For the first time since her parents' death, Lily felt a flicker of purpose stronger than her grief. As the spring sun dipped below the Rockies, casting long shadows across Hollow Ridge, she made a silent vow to her new companions. "We're a family now," she said, her voice firm despite her age. "And family protects each other, no matter what." She had no idea how true those words would prove to be. Summer swept into Hollow Ridge with a blaze of heat, turning the forest floor into a carpet of pine needles and wildflowers. For 6-year-old Lily Carter, the longer days brought new challenges. What had started as 4 fragile wolf pups in her grandmother's root cellar had grown into rambunctious young wolves with appetites to match their energy. The cellar, once a perfect hideaway, was now a cramped prison. Lily could no longer keep them satisfied with kitchen scraps or the occasional squirrel she managed to snare. Their playful tussles rattled the shelves, threatening to send jars of preserves crashing to the ground, and their yips and howls grew louder, risking discovery whenever Ellen lingered too close to the cellar door. On a sweltering July morning, Lily made a choice. She rose before the sun, slipping out of the cabin with a burlap sack slung over her shoulder. She'd found a new sanctuary 3 weeks earlier, an abandoned trapper's shack deep in the forest, its roof half caved but one room still standing strong. For 4 days she worked in secret, dragging fallen branches to shore up the walls, stuffing gaps with moss and leaves to block the wind, and layering the floor with a thick bed of pine needles. A trickling stream ran nearby, solving the water problem. It wasn't perfect, but it was freedom. Moving the wolves was the hardest part. Now the size of large dogs, they couldn't fit in her jacket anymore. Lily waited for a night when Ellen took her arthritis medicine, a dose strong enough to knock her out till morning. Under a moonless sky, she led the wolves from the cellar one by one. Ash went first, his dark gray bulk moving silently as if he understood the stakes. Ember followed with her reddish coat glinting faintly in the starlight. Flint needed constant nudging, his restless energy making him pause to sniff every shadow. Spark, ever the mischief maker, nearly ruined it all by darting after a rustling mouse. But Lily's sharp whisper brought him back. By midnight, all 4 wolves were settled in the shack. Lily collapsed beside them, her small chest heaving from exhaustion and triumph. "I'll come every day," she promised, running her fingers through Ash's thickening fur. "No one will find you here." The wolves pressed against her, their warmth a silent agreement to this new chapter. The plan worked better than she'd dared hope. Lily balanced her days between chores, school prep, and tending to her secret family. She taught them to hunt small game, rabbits and voles, though their instincts seemed to kick in naturally. She marveled at their transformation, their puppy clumsiness giving way to the sleek grace of predators. Yet with her, they remained gentle, greeting her with eager nudges and soft whines. Lily didn't know how rare this was, wild wolves accepting a human child as one of their own. Trouble brewed in early September, just as school resumed. Hank Grayson, who ran the feed store, swore he'd seen a massive wolf near his barn at dusk. A few days later, the Miller family claimed 2 wolves had watched their sheep from the tree line. By week's end, Hollow Ridge buzzed with sightings and rumors. "Never seen wolves this bold," Jacob Holt declared at an emergency town meeting in the community hall, his voice thick with conviction. "They're closing in on us. Something's drawing them." Sheriff Tom Bradley tried to ease the rising panic. "Wolves are territorial. Could be a new pack testing the edges. Let's not jump to conclusions." But his words fell flat against the growing fear. Old Widow Pierce, her voice trembling with age, stood up. "My pa told stories of wolfkin. Children who ran with packs, spoke their tongue. Different kids touched by the wild." Her rheumy eyes swept the crowd, landing on Lily, who sat quietly beside Ellen. A ripple of unease passed through the room. "That's nonsense," Clara Evans snapped, rising from her seat. "Wolves are animals, not fairy tale friends. They don't bond with humans. But the seed was planted. In the weeks that followed, Lily felt the shift. Mothers pulled their kids away when she passed in town. Conversations hushed when she entered the feed store. Jacob Holt's truck lingered too long near their cabin, his hard eyes watching from the driver's seat. One afternoon, a pack of older boys trailed her home from school, howling mockingly and calling her wolf brat. When she ignored them, Jacob's nephew, a lanky kid named Tyler, hurled a rock that struck her arm. Lily spun around, her green eyes blazing with a fury that silenced them for a heartbeat. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice steady beyond her years, "or you'll regret it." The boys laughed, but it was a nervous sound. They scattered, shouting taunts from a safer distance. Lily rubbed her bruised arm, fighting tears. She couldn't tell them the truth. Her wolves were real, and they were hers. Ellen Carter had lived in Hollow Ridge all her 68 years. She knew its rhythms, its people, its secrets. Since Lily came to her after the crash, she'd sensed a wildness in the girl, a spark of something untamed, tempered by a love deeper than her young age should allow. Lately, though, Ellen grew uneasy. Lily vanished into the woods for hours, returning with dirt-smudged cheeks and a secretive air. Food vanished from the pantry too fast. Then came the whispers. Wolves, strange behavior, suspicion. One crisp October morning, Ellen followed her granddaughter. Her aching knees protested each step, but she kept her distance as Lily wove through the trees with uncanny ease. When the girl disappeared into the shack, Ellen crept closer, peering through a chink in the wall. Her breath caught. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by 4 half-grown wolves. Ash's massive head rested in her lap as she scratched his ears. Ember dropped a dead rabbit at her feet, and Lily praised her as if it were a treasure. The wolves moved with a careful tenderness Ellen couldn't reconcile with the killers she'd been taught to fear. A twig snapped under Ellen's foot. 5 heads whipped toward her. Ash stepped in front of Lily, his silver-streaked body tense, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Grandma!" Lily's voice quavered as she stood. "Don't be scared. They won't hurt you. They're my friends." Ellen stepped into the clearing, her legs trembling. The wolves watched her, their amber eyes sharp but still. "Lily Carter," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of awe and dread. "What have you done?" Lily spilled her story, the orphaned pups, the cellar, the shack. Ellen's mind churned. Pride in Lily's compassion warred with fear for her safety. Understanding of her loneliness clashed with the town's hatred of wolves, and beneath it all lurked a guilt Ellen had buried deep. 3 years ago, it was her, not Jacob Holt, who'd killed the she-wolf. She'd been foraging for mushrooms when the animal lunged from the brush, teeth bared in a snarl. Panicked, Ellen fired her old rifle, never knowing the wolf was guarding a den, never imagining her granddaughter would find the pups and claim them as her own. Now, staring at Ash's silver coat, so like his mother's, Ellen felt the weight of that day settle on her shoulders. "I killed her," she whispered, tears welling. "I didn't know." Lily's face crumpled, but she didn't pull away. "She was protecting them, like you protect me," she said, her voice breaking. Before Ellen could answer, Lily turned and ran deeper into the woods, the wolves trailing her like shadows. By nightfall, word of Lily's wolves raced through Hollow Ridge like a brush fire. Stories grew wilder with each telling. Some said she trained them to hunt for her. Others claimed she spoke their language. The most outlandish swore she'd been raised by wolves after the crash. The truth, that a little girl had saved orphaned pups out of love, seemed too simple to believe. The town council called an emergency meeting. The hall overflowed, voices clashing in a storm of fear and anger. "Those wolves need to go. Now!" Jacob Holt bellowed, his face red with fury. "They've lost their fear of us. It's only a matter of time before someone dies." Ranchers nodded, clutching tails of missing lambs. Parents clutched their kids tighter. "We don't even know if these are the wolves we've seen," Clara Evans countered, her voice sharp. "Lily's with them all the time, and they've never hurt her." "You willing to bet your students' lives on that, teacher?" Jacob shot back. "What happens when one follows her to school?" The debate raged for hours. Ellen and Lily sat in the back, Ellen's arm tight around her granddaughter. Lily stared ahead, her small hands clenched in her lap. By the end, the town split. Jacob's faction demanded the wolves' destruction, while a smaller group, led by Clara, pushed for caution. Sheriff Bradley promised only to look into it, his words drowned by the crowd's unrest. As they left, Jacob blocked their path. "I've hunted wolves my whole life," he said, his voice low and cold. "Never thought I'd see Hollow Ridge defend them over its own. Whatever hold you've got on those beasts, girl, it won't save them." His eyes bore into Lily's. "Nature always wins." Ellen pulled Lily close. "She's a child, Jacob. Leave her be." "A child who's made a mess will have to clean up," he replied, stepping aside. "Wolves are killers. It's in their blood, just like the one that took my pa." As they hurried home through the dark, Lily whispered, "My wolves don't hurt anyone unless they're scared first." Ellen squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of hostile stares trailing them into the night. The threats started a week after the town meeting. First, it was a gutted rabbit left on the cabin porch, its throat torn open in a crude mockery of a wolf kill. Then came the notes, scribbled warnings shoved under the door. "Control your wolf, girl, or we will." Windows shattered in the night, glass glinting like ice on the floor. One morning, Ellen woke to find "Wolf Lover" scrawled across the cabin door in red paint that dripped like blood. Sheriff Bradley investigated each incident, his weathered face grim, but the culprits left no tracks. "Folks are scared," he told Ellen, his voice heavy with apology. "Fear makes people do ugly things." "They're terrorizing a child," Ellen snapped, her usual calm fraying. "What kind of town does this to a 6-year-old?" "I'm doing what I can," Bradley said, shifting uncomfortably. "But this can't go on. Either the wolves leave, or you and Lily might have to." The words hung between them like a storm cloud. Leave Hollow Ridge? The idea clawed at Ellen's heart. This cabin held her life, memories of raising her daughter, welcoming Lily, even the faint echo of her late husband's laughter in the creak of the floorboards. But as the harassment worsened, she began to wonder if staying was worth the cost. Lily, meanwhile, clung to her wolves. She spent every spare moment at the shack, bringing them scraps of her own meals, bits of bread, chicken bones, whatever she could smuggle. She read them stories from her school books, her soft voice mingling with the rustle of leaves. On nights when she could slip away, she slept beside them, curled against Ash's warm bulk, while Ember, Flint, and Spark formed a protective ring. The wolves had grown, Ash now a towering figure with a silver-streaked coat, the others close behind. Their bond with Lily defied everything Hollow Ridge believed about wolves, a connection deeper than instinct. Clara Evans became their unexpected shield. The school teacher stood up to bullies who taunted Lily, her sharp tongue cutting through their jeers. She dropped off groceries when Ellen grew too wary to face the town's stares. At council meetings, she argued for a humane solution, relocating the wolves to a reserve rather than killing them. Her efforts earned her glares from Jacob Holt's crew, who saw any mercy as a betrayal of their way of life. Jacob's hatred burned hotter with each passing day. The loss of his father to a wolf pack had festered into a personal vendetta, and Lily's wolves gave it new fuel. One frigid evening, as the first heavy snow blanketed Hollow Ridge, a mob gathered outside the cabin. Torches flickered in the dark, casting jagged shadows across the yard. Jacob stood at the front, his breath puffing in the icy air. "Ellen Carter," he shouted, "send the girl out. Time she sees what her wolves really are." Ellen stepped onto the porch, her silver hair glowing in the torchlight. She gripped her old rifle, its weight straining her arthritic hands. "Go home, Jacob," she called, her voice steady despite the tremble in her knees. "You're scaring a child who's done nothing wrong." "She's hiding killers," Jacob roared. "Predators that'll turn on her, just like they turned on my pa." "Your father's death was a tragedy," Ellen said, her tone softening, "but punishing these wolves won't bring him back." "Killers aren't innocent," Jacob spat. "You should know. You shot their mother yourself." A murmur rippled through the crowd, the detail fresh fuel for their anger. Ellen's shoulders sagged, but she held her ground. "I killed her out of fear, same as what's driving you now. I've seen better through Lily's eyes. Maybe you should too. For a tense moment, the mob teetered on the edge of violence. Then Bradley's cruiser rolled up, lights flashing red and blue against the snow. The crowd dispersed, grumbling, but Jacob's parting words cut through the night. "This ain't over, Ellen." Not by a damn sight. Winter thawed early that year, muddy trails replacing snowdrifts by late February. For Ellen and Lily, the changing season brought no peace. The harassment evolved. Phone lines cut, mail torn open, the feed store perpetually out of stock when Ellen shopped. Bradley's influence waned as the town turned against the Wolf sympathizers, his deputies openly siding with Jacob's faction. Then came the outsiders. 3 black SUVs rolled into Hollow Ridge one gray afternoon, parking outside the town hall. A man in a crisp jacket stepped out, his stern face framed by close-cropped hair. "Wildlife Services," he introduced himself as Agent Kessler, flashing credentials to the hastily gathered council. "We've had reports of problem wolves, habituated to humans. We're here to assess and eliminate the threat." Jacob smirked, barely hiding his glee. "About time the law did something right. Those wolves will be gone by nightfall." Clara's voice cut through the murmurs. "They're not here to assess. They've already decided to kill them. They haven't even seen the wolves." Kessler's expression didn't flicker. "Swift action ensures public safety. We've got orders." Word spread fast. Agents hunting dangerous wolves. A 6-year-old girl tied to the mystery. Ellen's stomach sank. "Where's Lily?" she asked Clara, who'd rushed to warn her. "We need to tell her." But Lily was already gone, off to the shack, oblivious to the danger closing in. By the time Ellen and Clara reached the sanctuary, they found only churned earth and wolf tracks leading deeper into the forest. Worse, fresh boot prints trailed the same path. Men had been there, and they were following the wolves. "They found them," Ellen whispered, her voice breaking. "Someone tipped them off. She's leading them away," Clara said, tracing the tracks, "into Dead Man's Hollow." Ellen paled. Dead Man's Hollow was a treacherous stretch of wilderness, steep cliffs, tangled roots, a maze even seasoned hunters avoided. "A child can't survive that alone," she said. Clara didn't hesitate. "I'll get Bradley. We need a search party. Now." Within an hour, Hollow Ridge rallied, fear for a lost child outweighing their anger. Volunteers gathered at the trailhead, armed with flashlights and coats. Bradley split them into teams. "Find Lily and bring her home," he ordered. "If you see the wolves, don't engage. Just report it." Jacob and 3 hunters stood apart, rifles gleaming despite Bradley's orders. "You think those agents are unarmed?" Jacob scoffed when challenged. "I'm not dying out there." Ellen insisted on joining, her joints screaming as she trudged beside Clara. "She mentioned a cave once," Ellen told her, clutching a ridge for support. "Near the falls in Deadman's Hollow, a place the wolves liked." "It's a start," Clara said, guiding her through the muck. Dusk fell, and a cold rain began, turning the search into a slog. Teams turned back as the storm worsened, but Ellen pressed on, her voice raw. "I left her once," she told Clara over the wind. "Not again." Unbeknownst to them, Lily had reached the cave hours earlier. At the first sight of armed men nearing the shack, she'd acted on instinct. Ash had bristled, sensing the threat before she did. "We've got to go," she'd whispered, and the wolves followed, weaving through narrow trails too tight for grown men. She knew the woods, every hollow, every overhang. The cave, tucked behind a waterfall, was her last refuge. The storm raged as night deepened, lightning splitting the sky. Inside the cave, Lily huddled against Ash, his warmth seeping through her soaked coat. Ember, Flint, and Spark lay close, their presence steadying her. The wolves had hesitated at the cave's mouth, but her pleas won them over. Hours passed, the storm's howl drowning her fears, until Ash's ears twitched, his growl vibrating through the dark. 2 figures emerged at the cave entrance, lit by a lightning flash. Not villagers or agents. These men wore dark gear, carrying dart guns and cages. "There they are," one hissed, his voice low. 4 prime wolves, just like we heard. And the girl, bonus." Lily shrank back, her heart pounding. These weren't hunters or officials. "Take the big one first," the leader said, aiming at Ash. The rest'll fall in line. Leave them alone, Lily cried, stepping between Ash and the gun. They're my family. Move, kid, the man said, his tone oddly gentle. We're not here to hurt them, just taking them somewhere they'll be valued. They're not yours, she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. The second man snorted. Wolves ain't family, girl. They're cash. Big money for collectors. As they advanced, Ash's growl deepened, the others tensing beside him. The leader sighed, adjusting his aim. Sorry, kid. He fired, but the dart didn't hit Ash. It struck Lily's shoulder. She gasped, staring at the tiny barb in her coat as the cave spun. Why? She mumbled, collapsing. Because you're the key, the leader said, catching her. They'll follow whoever's got you. The cave exploded into chaos. Ash lunged, slamming into the man with a snarl, sending the dart gun skittering across the stone. Ember and Flint charged the second man, teeth flashing. Spark darted to Lily, dragging her limp form deeper into the cave with his jaws. Outside, Ellen and Clara heard a gunshot pierce the storm, a deafening crack that spurred them forward. Blood pooled on the cave floor as Ash grappled with the leader, his silver fur stained red from a knife slash. The second man fired wildly, a bullet ricocheting off the wall as Ember bit his arm. Shoot them! The leader yelled, wrestling Ash's snapping jaws. Another shot rang out, not from inside but from the entrance. The second man screamed, his gun dropping as a bullet shattered his wrist. Jacob Holt stood there, rifle raised, his face a mask of resolve. Step away from the girl and the wolves, he barked. Bradley and Clara appeared behind him, weapons drawn. Drop it, Bradley ordered. The men froze, then complied, hands raised. Ellen rushed past, spotting Spark guarding Lily's still form. Lily, she cried, pulling the dart free. She's breathing, she said, tears streaming. But she needs a doctor. Clara knelt by Ash, now slumped from a gunshot wound, blood frothing at his mouth. He's hurt bad, she said, looking to Jacob. He was protecting her. Jacob stared at the wolf, his rifle lowering. The animal that had nearly died for Lily wasn't the monster he'd hunted all his life. Vet's closer than the hospital, he muttered. Let's move. Together they fashioned a stretcher from coats and branches, lifting Ash as the others watched, wary but still. Lily stirred faintly in Ellen's arms as they began the trek back through the storm, the night far from over. The storm battered Hollow Ridge as the group emerged from the forest, a ragged procession of soaked figures and fragile hope. Ash's breathing rasped, shallow and wet, blood soaking through the makeshift stretcher Jacob and Clara carried. Each step jolted his wounded body, but his amber eyes stayed fixed on Lily, cradled in Ellen's arms. The girl stirred faintly, her small hand twitching as the sedative ebbed. Sheriff Bradley marched ahead, the two intruders handcuffed and limping, their dark plans undone by the wolves they'd underestimated. Search parties met them at the trailhead, faces etched with relief and shock. Word spread like wildfire. Lily found, wolves fighting off attackers, Jacob Holt turning savior. The crowd parted silently as they hurried toward the veterinary clinic, a squat building on the edge of town. Dr. Henry Tate, a wiry man in his late 50s, had never treated a wolf before. His days were spent stitching up farm dogs and dosing cattle, but he met the challenge with a steady hand. Get him on the table, he barked, clearing space as Jacob and Clara heaved Ash up. In the next room, a paramedic tended to Lily. The dart sedative had worn off, leaving her groggy but awake. Ellen sat beside her, clutching her hand. Ash is hurt, isn't he? Lily asked, her voice small but sharp with intuition. Ellen nodded, brushing damp hair from Lily's forehead. Doctor, Tate's working on him. Jacob's helping. Jacob? Lily's green eyes widened. But he hates wolves. People change, Ellen said softly. Sometimes it takes seeing something real to shake loose old ghosts. Outside, Bradley grilled the captives. With their schemes shattered and wrists cuffed, they talked freely under the sheriff's steely gaze. Who sent you? He demanded, towering over the leader, a lean man named Victor Reese. Reese grimaced, flexing his bitten arm. Got a tip from some guy. Said he was a concerned local. Claimed there were wolves too close to people. Dangerous ones the town wouldn't handle. When we dug deeper, we saw the money in it. Socialized wolves fetch a fortune with the right buyers. Kidnapping the girl wasn't part of the plan? Bradley pressed. That came later, Reese admitted. The tip said she controlled them. We figured she'd make transport easy. Name, Bradley snapped. Who was it? Carter, Reese said. Paul Carter. Said he was her uncle. Worried about her safety. Bradley's jaw tightened. Lily had no uncle named Paul. Ellen's daughter had been an only child, and her husband's kin were long gone. Get them to the station, he told his deputy, then strode back to the clinic, his mind racing. Inside, Dr. Tate worked with quiet precision, his hands buried in Ash's silver fur. The bullet had torn through the wolf's hind leg and grazed his lung, leaving a mess of blood and shattered bone. Jacob handed tools, his weathered hands steady despite the tremor in his voice. The wolf that got my paw wasn't like this one, he said, breaking the silence. I've had 20 years to bury that day, but I never let myself see it straight. It was rabid, crazy eyes, foam at the mouth. Not hunting, just killing. My paw was in the wrong spot. Tate glanced up, his face neutral. And you've hated wolves ever since. Jacob's shoulders slumped. Easier to blame them all than admit it was chance. This one, he looked at Ash, unconscious under anesthesia. He fought for her like she was his own. I've tracked wolves my whole life, and I've never seen that. Grief twists us, Tate said, tying off a suture. But truth cuts through if you let it. Bradley stepped in, his expression dark. Ellen, we need to talk. He pulled her aside, keeping his voice low as Lily dozed. The traffickers got a tip from a Paul Carter. Claimed he was Lily's uncle. You know anyone by that name? Ellen frowned, shaking her head. No Paul in our family. My daughter had no siblings, and my husband's brother died before Lily was born. I'll need your legal papers. Lily's parents will. Anything tied to her, Bradley said. This wasn't just about wolves. Someone's after more. Ellen fetched the documents from the cabin, and under the clinic's harsh light, they pored over them. A trust fund emerged, a hefty sum from Lily's parents, set aside for her future, controlled by her guardian until she turned 18. There's the prize, Bradley muttered. Make you look unfit. Wolves is the excuse, and someone steps in to claim her and the money. But who? Ellen asked, her voice tight. Most of our kin are gone. The answer rolled into Hollow Ridge the next morning. A sleek rental car parked outside the clinic, and a man in a press suit stepped out, mid-40s, polished shoes sinking into the mud. He strode in, confidence faltering at the sight of Bradley's cruiser. I'm Paul Carter, he announced, flashing a smile and ID. Lily's uncle. Heard my niece was hurt. Came to help. Bradley didn't blink. Funny timing, Paul. We were just talking about you. With the men in my jail for trying to snatch her and her wolves. The man's smile vanished. I don't know what you're saying. I'm family. No one called you, Bradley cut in. And stranger still, Lily's dad had no brothers. So who are you, really? Paul, or whoever he was, paled, his polished facade cracking. A quick records check later confirmed it. Daniel Reese, a distant cousin of Lily's father, reborn as Paul Carter after sniffing out the trust fund. He'd orchestrated it all, stoking the wolf panic, hiring traffickers, aiming to discredit Ellen and seize Lily's inheritance. The wolves were just collateral. The village gathered outside as news broke. Traffickers caught, a fraud unmasked. The mood was heavy, a shared reckoning of how close they'd come to losing Lily to their own fear. Dr. Tate emerged, wiping his hands. Ash will pull through, he said. Leg's a mess, and his lung took a hit, but he's tough, needs time, but he'll walk again. Lily, now fully awake, threw her arms around Ellen, sobbing with relief. Jacob stepped forward, hat in hand. I owe you all an apology, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. 20 years, I led this town against wolves, feeding off my own pain. Convinced you they were nothing but killers. Last night I saw different. That wolf, he nodded toward the clinic. He nearly died for Lily, not out of fear or training, but something bigger. My pa's killer was sick, not a wolf's true nature. These ones showed me what I'd forgotten. He turned to Lily. I was wrong, girl, about them and you. The words hung heavy, a crack in Hollow Ridge's old beliefs. Spring bloomed early that year, wildflowers spilling across the forest floor. At the clinic, Tate gave Ash his final check. "Remarkable," he said, testing the wolf's leg. "He'll limp, but he's strong again." Lily sat beside Ash, her hand in his fur, a quiet confidence in her eyes. "When can he go home?" she asked. Tate exchanged a look with Ellen. "That's the thing, Lily. They can't stay here forever. They're wild, not pets." Tears welled, but she nodded. "They need to run free." Jacob stepped in with a plan. Changed by that night, he'd rallied the town to create the Hollow Ridge Wolf Sanctuary. 5,000 acres of protected forest, hunting band, bordering Ellen's land. "They'll have space," he told Lily as they walked the boundary one April day. "But they can visit you. Folks can watch from trails, learn instead of fear." The sanctuary's opening drew a crowd. Locals, outsiders, even state wildlife reps. Lily spoke, her voice clear despite her nerves. "Wolves aren't monsters," she said to Ash at her side. "They love their family, protect it. We can share this place, we just had to figure out how." The words shifted something in Hollow Ridge, fear giving way to wonder. Years passed. The sanctuary thrived, drawing researchers and tourists. Jacob, once the fiercest hunter, led tours, teaching wolf ways. Ash remained alpha, Ember birthing cubs with a wild male who joined them. The four never lost their tie to Lily, appearing when she called, keeping distance from others but letting her sit among them like pack. Dr. Laura Kim, a biologist, studied them, writing papers on their bond. "Early human contact shaped them," she noted, "but they're still wild. Proof wolves and people can coexist." Lily grew under Clara's guidance, excelling in science, her wolf knowledge aiding experts. By 17, she was a junior ranger, her story inspiring visitors. When college called, a wildlife program recruiting her, she said goodbye. At the sanctuary's edge, Ash, graying now, pressed his head to hers. Ember, Flint, and Spark joined, a final circle. "Take care of each other," she whispered, tears falling. 8 years later, Lily Carter, now 25 and a biologist, returned. Ellen greeted her, white-haired and beaming. After dinner, Lily asked, "Are they still here?" "Ash passed 2 winters back," Ellen said gently. "Old age. The others are out there. Ember leads now." That night, Lily stood at the sanctuary's edge and howled, a sound she'd learned as a child. Silence stretched, then 3 howls answered. Ember emerged gray-muzzled, with Flint and Spark behind. Recognition flared in their eyes. Ember nudged her. Flint circled. Spark licked her hand. "I'm home," Lily whispered, kneeling among them. Under the Colorado stars, the circle closed. A girl's kindness repaid 1,000-fold, her life shaped by wolves into a bridge between worlds. Hollow Ridge, once a place of fear, became a testament to change, proof that even the oldest beliefs can bend when faced with truth.